I was the kind of person who could sit in a cafe for an hour and not say a word to anyone. The barista already knew my order: black coffee, nothing added, but still asked every morning, just to be polite. I always hesitated before answering, as if I might suddenly surprise both of us with something different. I never did. That morning was like any other. September sunlight falling uneven through the glass, too warm for the season. I sat with my laptop open but untouched, scrolling through half-finished drafts of emails I would never send. Work things. Personal things. A paused thought about asking someone if they wanted to meet for dinner. Deleted before I could even hit space. I didn't notice her at first. She was across the room, talking with another woman, her friend, I guessed. Something about the way she tilted her head when she listened caught my attention. Mid-40s maybe, though it was hard to tell. She wore her hair pulled back, the kind of effortless style that looks like it belongs that way. I told myself I was only watching because she looked familiar. Maybe I'd seen her around the neighborhood. Maybe in line at the grocery store. But when she laughed, quiet, almost like she was holding it back, I knew I was lying to myself. Her friend left to take a call outside, and suddenly she was alone at the table. That's when it happened. She glanced up, met my eyes across the room, and held them just long enough for me to forget how to breathe. I looked down at my coffee, folded the edge of my napkin until it was a tight, crumpled square. I thought that would be the end of it. Just one of those quick collisions you carry with you for the rest of the day, replaying it while waiting for the train, telling yourself it meant nothing. But then she stood. Walked over. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Her voice was even, not warm, not cold. Just steady. I nodded before my brain caught up, sliding my things closer to make space. She lowered herself into the chair across from me, setting her cup down with both hands around it. A small gesture, but I noticed the way her fingers lingered against the heat. We didn't say much at first. She looked around the cafe, like she was still half in her conversation from before. I kept folding the napkin, unfolding it, starting again. Finally she said, "You always sit here, don't you?" I blinked. "You've noticed?" Her mouth curved, just slightly. "Hard not to." The words sat between us, heavier than they should have been. I tried to think of something clever, or at least normal, to follow, but nothing came. Instead, I just nodded, like that was enough. Her friend returned a few minutes later, sliding into the chair beside me without hesitation. She smiled at me in a way that felt practiced, then leaned toward her friend and said, "Your turn next." I didn't understand what she meant. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. The older woman only shook her head, brushing it off with the kind of half-laugh people use when they don't want to explain. The moment passed, but something shifted. I felt it. When I got home later, I stared at my phone longer than usual. There was a message waiting unsent. Just her name, though I had never asked for her number. I don't know why I thought of writing it. That night, as I set the phone down, the words her friend had said echoed back to me, "Your turn next." I couldn't tell if it was a warning, or an invitation. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. But 2 evenings later, when I walked up the narrow stairs to my apartment, there she was, 2 doors down, fumbling with her keys. A grocery bag slipped in her hand, the sound of bottles shifting inside. We both stopped. That pause again, like either of us wanted to admit how familiar it already felt. "Here," I said, reaching instinctively. My hand brushed against hers as I steadied the bag. A tiny touch, gone before either of us acknowledged it. She exhaled softly. "Thanks. These old locks never work the first time." The moment should have ended there. But instead, I found myself leaning against the railing while she opened her door, the bag still balanced in my arms. Inside, her place was warm but a little cluttered, books stacked on the coffee table, half a tea mug abandoned near the window. She noticed me looking and gave a faint, self-deprecating smile. "Divorce leaves you with too much furniture, not enough time to care about it." She hadn't said much, but it was more than I expected. A personal truth, dropped like a pebble into still water. I set the bag down and hesitated. I've been here a year. I don't think I've ever really unpacked either. Her gaze lingered, as if measuring what I meant. The silence after stretched long enough that I noticed the clock ticking in the kitchen. She poured tea, sliding a cup across to me. Careful, it's hot. I wasn't used to being cared for like that, not in such a small, ordinary way. I cradled the cup longer than I needed to, letting the heat seep into my hands. We sat across from each other, and conversation bent towards safer ground. Neighborhood noise. The cafe we both frequented. How she always ordered green tea but never finished it. How I drank black coffee and regretted it half the time. Then she looked at me, really looked. You're young, she said simply. Not a question. I nodded. 24. She pressed her lips together, as if she'd known but wanted to hear it. I'm 46. The numbers hung between us. I felt them settle like dust in my lungs. Not scandalous, not impossible, just undeniable. I tried to laugh it off. That's not old. She smiled, but not in agreement. It's not young either. I wanted to ask why she told me that, why it mattered enough for her to say aloud. But I didn't. Instead, I sipped my tea, lukewarm now, and thought of her friend's words, your turn next. When I left, she walked me to the door. For a moment we both hesitated in the narrow hallway, where the shadows from the single bulb blurred the edges of everything. She reached to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, then stopped halfway, lowering her hand. Instead, she touched my sleeve lightly, almost absently, like checking if I was real. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. It never was. I was back at the cafe, same corner table, same untouched laptop screen. She came in late afternoon, the kind of hour when the light feels too sharp through the windows. She saw me. Paused. Then walked over anyway. Busy? She asked. I shook my head. Pretending to be. That earned a small smile, but it didn't linger. She set her bag down, the strap sliding from her shoulder like a slow surrender. For a while we just sat, the hum of the espresso machine filling in for words. She leaned on her elbow, watching the people outside more than me. I should probably not sit here. Why? Her eyes flicked toward mine, quick, unsteady. Because people notice things. I didn't answer. I folded the corner of a receipt into smaller and smaller shapes until it nearly tore. Then, as if to erase the weight of what she'd said, she asked about my work. About my family. Questions that felt ordinary, though her gaze never left my hands. I wanted to tell her something back. Something true. Instead I said, I've been here almost every day this week. I know, she murmured, almost to herself. That was when the door opened, and her friend, the same one from before, walked in. The shift in her face was immediate, like a curtain drawn. She straightened, her voice a little too casual. You still here? Her friend teased, glancing at me. Careful, he might think you've adopted him. The joke landed heavier than it should have. My chest tightened. I watched her carefully, waiting for her to laugh it off, to dismiss the thought. Instead, she sipped her tea, eyes fixed on the cup. Her friend was called away by someone else near the counter. The air between us felt changed. Sharper. She leaned in then, voice low. You see what I mean? I nodded. Couldn't find words. The silence stretched again, filled with tiny movements, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup, mine tapping against the table. We were both circling something unnamed, something fragile enough that a single wrong word would break it. At one point, her hand drifted across the table, not reaching for mine, not exactly. Just close enough that if I moved an inch, our skin would touch. I almost did. But then she pulled back, folding her hands together in her lap. We shouldn't, she whispered. I wanted to ask, shouldn't what? But the words caught in my throat. Instead, we sat in that too-bright cafe, the clock ticking above us, both of us suspended in a moment that nearly tipped into something else, something we couldn't name, But almost did doubt we ended up walking together one evening, not because we planned it but because the timing matched. She was leaving the building as I was coming in. The September air carried that in-between chill, warm sun giving up to colder nights. "Just around the block," she said when I offered to walk with her. Like it didn't mean anything. We didn't talk much. Our footsteps did the rhythm for us. She held her jacket closed with one hand, the other brushing lightly against her bag. I shoved mine deep into my pockets, afraid they might drift closer to hers. At the corner, she slowed. "I used to do this with him," she said. Her voice didn't waver, but I could feel what she meant without asking who him was. The ex-husband. The ghost still living in her habits. I nodded, not sure what to say. She went on before I had to try. "You remind me of what I missed." The words were soft, but they struck deep. I almost asked what she meant, what exactly I reminded her of, but I held back, afraid the answer would undo me. We reached a small bench by the park, the wood damp from earlier rain. She sat, so I sat too. The silence felt heavier than the air. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't look at me the way you do." I blinked. My mouth opened, then closed again. "I don't, you do," she said, not unkind, just certain. Her hands tightened around the edge of her jacket. "And I let you. That's worse." The confession sat between us, raw and bare. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, or that it wasn't as obvious as she thought, but both would have been lies. Instead, I admitted quietly, "Sometimes I don't know how not to." Her eyes turned toward me then, steady and searching. For a long second, either of us moved. The hum of traffic in the distance, the faint rustle of leaves, it all faded. There was only the look. I could feel the words rising in my throat, something close to a confession, but fear tangled them. Fear of sounding young. Fear of sounding like I wanted too much. She broke the silence first. "You make me forget the rules I set for myself." The honesty in her tone almost undid me. My pulse raced, my hands restless inside my pockets. I thought if I leaned closer now. But I didn't. The air between us was so thin it felt breakable. I could smell the faint trace of her tea on her breath, the warmth of her sitting inches away. I wanted to ask her everything. I wanted to say, "So what now?" Instead, the words that came out were smaller, softer. "Do you want me to stop?" The question hung there, unanswered. The next morning, I half expected to run into her in the hallway. Same grocery bags, same fumbling with keys. But her door stayed closed. At the cafe, her table sat empty too. I told myself it was nothing, that people had lives, schedules, things to do. But by the third day, the absence felt deliberate. I kept noticing her in the small ways absence announces itself. The unused tea mug in my memory. The silence where her laugh should have been. My own coffee tasted thinner, like the water hadn't been measured right. When I finally saw her again, it wasn't where I expected. Late evening. I came home to find her standing outside her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp in a way I hadn't heard before. "No, it's fine. Don't worry about it," she said, then a pause. Her back to me, shoulders tense. "I told you already. It's over. I can't do this again." I froze in the stairwell until she lowered her phone, hand pressed against her forehead. She noticed me then, eyes widening, caught. I opened my mouth, but she spoke first. "It was nothing. Just my son." That word landed heavy. Son. I hadn't imagined her as someone's mother, though I should have. Of course I should have. She looked away before I could respond, unlocking her door too quickly, shutting it behind her. After that, she was different. Not cold exactly, but cautious. At the cafe, she sat closer to the window instead of with me. In the hallway, she offered polite nods instead of conversation. A recalibration. And me, I matched it. Or tried to. Stopped showing up as often. Pretended I was busy with work, though most nights I just sat on the floor of my apartment, scrolling through nothing, waiting for I don't know what. I caught myself drafting a message once. Just her name, then deleted. Then again, "Are you okay?" Deleted. Then, "Do you want me to stop?" Deleted before I even finished typing. The bench replayed itself in my head every night. The question I'd asked, "Do you want me to stop?" still unanswered. I tried to imagine her reply. Sometimes yes. Sometimes no. The truth was, I didn't know which version I feared more. One evening, I went to the cafe later than usual. Her table by the window was empty. For the first time, I didn't sit down. I just stood there, staring at the vacant chair like it might explain something. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I turned and walked out, leaving the seat empty. I wasn't planning to knock. I told myself I was just passing her door on the way upstairs, that I'd keep walking. But my hand paused against the railing, and before I could think twice, my knuckles tapped lightly against the wood. No answer at first. Then the shuffle of steps. The door cracked open, her face in shadow. "You shouldn't." She started, then stopped. "I know," I said. My voice sounded thinner than I meant it to. "But I had to." She let me in, not with words, just a quiet step back. The apartment looked the same, books stacked, tea mug half finished, but the air felt heavier, like something had been waiting for us. We stood in her kitchen. The clock ticked too loudly above the fridge. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, as if bracing herself. "I've been avoiding you," she said finally. Her tone wasn't defensive, just tired. "Because this, whatever this is, it scares me." I swallowed. "Scares me too." She looked up at me then, eyes softer than her voice. "You're young. You'll move on. But me? If I let this happen, I don't move on. I carry it. I don't know if I can." Her honesty pressed down on me, heavier than silence ever had. For a long moment I didn't move. I wanted to close the space between us, to prove something neither of us had asked for. But instead I said, "Maybe I don't want to move on." That landed. I could see it in the way her breath caught, in how her fingers tightened against her sleeve. She turned her head slightly, almost laughing, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know what you're saying." "Then tell me," I said quietly. "Tell me to stop." The words hung there, raw. I almost wished she would. It would have been easier. Cleaner. But she didn't. She just stared at me, like she was weighing something she couldn't quite hold. Finally, her shoulders dropped. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. The confession didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a door cracked open in a room neither of us had planned to enter. Vulnerable. Fragile. We didn't move right away. Just stood there in the narrow kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between heartbeats. Then, slowly, her hand found mine. Not clasping, not pulling, just resting. A small, human weight. I looked at her, unsure of what came next. She gave the faintest smile, the kind that carried both fear and relief. "Okay," she said softly. And for the first time, it felt like the silence wasn't against us. Time passed, though I couldn't tell you how much. Weeks, maybe months. Enough for the seasons to shift without either of us naming them. She still sat at the cafe sometimes, though not always by the window anymore. I still ordered black coffee, though once or twice I tried something different, and she teased me for it. We didn't talk about what we were, or where it was heading. We just kept showing up. One morning, 8:47 a.m., I found her waiting outside the cafe, green tea in her hand, steam curling into the autumn air. She handed it to me without a word, as if we had been doing this all along. I took it, even though I didn't like tea, because it was hers. Later that week, we walked again. Same route around the block, same damp bench by the park. This time, she didn't talk about him. She just sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. It felt less like replacing something and more like making space for something new. At her apartment, the books were still stacked high, the half-finished tea mugs still scattered, but there was more warmth in it now. Some evenings I cooked, awkwardly, burning pasta while she leaned against the counter, laughing at my attempts. Other nights she'd read aloud from whatever novel she'd picked up, her voice low, steady, while I listened like it was the only sound in the room. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes she pulled back, lost in thought, protective of her solitude. Sometimes I worried I was leaning too hard, too fast. But the pauses no longer felt like walls, they felt like breaths. Space to exist, separately and together. Once, while folding napkins after dinner, she caught me watching her hands. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She just reached across the table, touched my wrist lightly, and that was enough. I realized then that love, if that's what this was, didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like steam from a mug, rising slowly, fading, rising again. Ordinary. Steady. Looking back, I can still hear her friend's words, "Your turn next." At the time, I didn't understand. Now I think I do. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't even about me. It was about her, about letting herself choose again. And somehow she did. So when we sit together now, her with her tea, me with my coffee gone cold, I don't feel paused anymore. I feel here. With her. And sometimes, when the silence settles soft between us, she glances over, just the smallest smile tugging at her lips. That's when I know we've found something only we could understand. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?